Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Triangulation is brought to you by Cashfly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Triangulation, episode 99, recorded April 17th, 2013. Patrick Rothfuss. Welcome to Triangulation, the show where we interview the most interesting people we can find. Sometimes they're more interesting than others. And we do a show about it. Actually, almost always we get really great people, but for all the amazing, wonderful people we have met through this show and got a chance to talk to, this is the one that I've been the most excited about for some time because I'm a huge fan of his fiction. Patrick Rothfuss joins us on Triangulation. You've heard us talk about his books. You might have seen him before on NSFW. The Kingkiller Chronicles is, I presume, a trilogy. We're going to find out in a minute. 2 books have already been published, and they are must-reads. And I'll tell you, well, first of all, welcome, Patrick, to Triangulation.
Hey there.
Great to see you. I came to know of your books because Trey Ratcliffe, the amazing photographer, said, if you can read The Name of the Wind and not like it, then you cannot be a friend of mine anymore. And I thought, well, my God, I want to be his friend. So I picked the book up. I actually listened to it on Audible. And immediately I was so grateful because sometimes this happens where, you know, the recording outpaces your ability to write. Fortunately, the second book, The Wise Man's Fear, so I immediately segued right into that. Listened to all of that. I don't know, that's 90 hours or something of books. And now I'm bereft.
Yep. You'll have to wait just a little bit. Consider it part of the experience.
I know, it's fine. It's good. I'm just absorbing because it's okay. So anyway, fanboy squeeze out of the way. I'm just a huge fan. This is some of the most literate stuff I've read in this fantasy genre ever, which is kind of nice because there's a lot of stuff here that the ideas are great and you kind of enjoy the world, but there's a cohesion to this world that is unique. I mean, it all seems to fit, and it seems to have a logic behind it. And so I've been wanting to meet you to find out how you do something like this. Tell me a little bit about yourself. You're a young guy.
Thank you. It's nice to hear that.
Well, you're not a gray beard yet.
I'm kind of a slacker. My self-identity is locked up at about 23 years old. I was the eternal student for a while until I kind of quit doing that, and then I became a teacher.
I believe that because Kvoth spends most of the first 2 books in school. So I knew immediately that you loved university.
Well, you know, it's interesting because that's one of those things where people look at it and like they read my bio and they're like, wow, Pat spent 9 years as an undergrad, which isn't an exaggeration, by the way. I declared for a solid 3 years.
Wow.
And whoop, did we?
No, it's just
lose?
It's blinking in and out in a little bit, but we'll make it. We'll make it.
But what really happened is I wrote a lot of those university sections when I'd only been in school for a couple years. So they assumed that it's kind of based off some sort of personal experience, but it really wasn't.
You're telling me you've been writing this novel for how long?
I started in 1994.
Holy cow. 20 years ago.
Yep. It took me 7 years just to write it to the end of this particular story. And boy, what an unfortunate place for my face to freeze.
Thank you, Skype. An endless source of mirth.
But yeah, I started it back in 94. And I just sort of was making it up as I went along. I had an unsuccessful high school novel like everyone does.
Okay, so you knew you wanted to be a writer at the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I knew I wanted to be a writer. Although, honestly, before I ever took a crack at writing a novel, I took a crack at writing a computer game, believe it or not,
Oh, really?
in BASIC.
Oh, my.
Yeah. I tried to write a text adventure like the old Infocom games. I don't know if you ever played those.
Oh,
but
yes,
they were,
loved them. Zork.
oh, yeah, those were
Planetfall.
Yeah. And so I'm like, I could write this. And I typed up this thing. And when I printed it out on the dot matrix, it had to be, 50 pages long. Trying to figure out how to get the thing to parse text. It was a nightmare. I wasn't that great a programmer, but I knew I wanted to write computer games and tell stories like that.
So, it's interesting that you should say that because those were often called interactive fiction, those early text-based adventure games.
Yeah. And, I think of those early games as almost like the classic movies. If you see those, the old Harvey, those old movies where all they really had was a script and some actors and a sound stage.
It was almost theater, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you had to have a great script.
Right.
And a great actor.
Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart.
6-foot invisible bunny.
Right, who you never see.
You never see.
And it was great storytelling because the story is all you had. And so these games had good storytelling too.
Right.
Because that's all they had, no flashy graphics.
Right.
And these days we've kind of fallen into this wonderland of they have this gorgeous cinematography they can do in these games, and you can render an entire football team or an African rainforest or a dragon. And, the story has kind of fallen by the wayside because it's not as essential. It's the same thing that's happened in Hollywood, in all honesty.
It's so true because I think of the last two games I've completed, Skyrim and Bioshock Infinite, and they both were lauded for their storyline, but really it was, compared to the Infocom adventures, a very scant storyline because they're first-person shooters, and really you're playing the game to kill things.
Well, I can't speak to Bioshock Infinite because I've been trying to get some writing done.
Yeah, you're not allowed. You are not allowed to play a single game until you finish this.
But I've heard the storytelling in Infinite was pretty good
for a first-person shooter.
But for Skyrim, I played the hell out of Skyrim.
Loved it.
And it was a great game. I mean, it was compelling. But actually, I'm going to take that back. It was addictive.
Yeah.
I enjoyed playing it.
Yeah.
But
there was no story at all.
There was no story, and honestly, I don't know if I can really say that it was a great game, just because, and I'm probably going to cheese off a bunch of people here. It had a lot to recommend it, and I tell you, I played the game like a rat hitting the feeder bar in a Psych 101 experiment.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's a good game.
No.
That means it's addictive.
Right.
And honestly, the core mechanism of the game, led to me doing things that were contrary to my immersion in the story. Because how the skill tree built up, right?
Right. So you have to spend some time, fishing or building things in a forge and banging on stuff, doing stuff that really doesn't further the story at all. In fact, it's a detour.
Exactly. So tell me you didn't make 1,000 iron daggers and become the best smith in the land.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Because you need the skill tree.
You need the skill. But honestly, you don't become a master smith by making 1,000 iron daggers.
No, it's boring.
It's ridiculous.
It's boring.
And it's boring. It's a
boring.
grind.
Right.
And similarly, I needed to build up my heavy armor skill. So I threw on the armor.
Right. And you
found
tank
a wolf
for hours.
up the mountains.
Yeah.
And I went and made a sandwich.
Right.
This is not immersive storytelling. It's effectively rewarding you for doing things which do nothing to further the game, and that's bad storytelling and it's bad game design.
Right.
Now that said, it was a beautiful world.
Yeah.
I explored it. There were these quests. It was compelling, but I did not finish it.
Now, you're working on a game, are you not?
I am not, as we speak, working on it, but I'm part of a team and I will be working on a game. They're in the early design stages right now, and I'm going to help write it and maybe give my opinion on certain design elements if they want to hear my opinion.
It's called Torment, the Tides of Numenera, and I hope that you will get to say this exact input, which is, yeah, it's fine to make an addictive, compelling, compulsive, not compelling, but compulsive game, but can we please have a story? Can I write a story for you? Please.
That's a great comparison. It should be compelling,
not compulsive.
Not compulsive.
Yep.
That is the best distinction I've ever heard. But actually, that's the reason I'm involved with the game.
Good.
Is because they really were talking about the storytelling, and they're modeling it. They put together a team that was based off the original Planescape Torment game, which was one of the best pieces of interactive fiction that I've ever played. I mean, 15 years ago, if you remember a game from 15 years ago.
We were talking before the show began that this is one of your favorite games.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The original Fallouts.
Oh, I love Fallout. That was fun. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a great example of, at the time, the graphics were pretty good, but honestly, you can go back and play that game and it's still really great. The gameplay matches well with the story. The story itself is compelling. It was a great world, and it had a real complexity and a richness that you just don't see mirrored very often.
So there's so many things I want to ask you, and of course we're not going to do any spoilers because I really want people to read the Kingkiller Chronicles. The first book came out in 2007. The second book 4 years later, in 2011. Tell me we're not going to wait to 2015 for the third volume.
It probably won't be 2015. But it probably isn't going to be this year as well.
So, but you're working really hard on it, right?
I am.
Okay. It's such a burden. I'm sure everybody who sees you says that.
It does come up in conversation. But honestly, I know that it comes from a place of love. They
love
our story.
We want to know what happens to Kavoth and what happened to those creatures he kills at the very beginning of the first book. Anyway, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I would like to talk a little bit, kind of obliquely, about the Kingkiller Chronicles. And one of the things that struck me immediately, and now I understand a little bit better. You just telling me you've been working on this for 20 years. For one thing, I tell people when they ask me to describe it, it's Harry Potter for grown-ups. Now I'm sure you hate that description, and now knowing that you began this long before Harry Potter ever emerged, it's not even in any way an accurate description. But there are some similarities. It's about a young man who goes to university. He's learning the arcana, which is kind of like learning to be a wizard. He's mastering some powers. But one of the things I notice immediately is, one of the things that bothered me about Harry Potter was it felt like she was pulling stuff out of her ass. There'd be the name of a spell, and it'd be like, oh, hey, looky here. And it was like, come on. And with you, I feel like there's a whole world that has a full and real and detailed, we may not see all the detail, but detailed reality somewhere in Patrick Rothfuss's mind, because there is and it's very hard to explain this, but you sense it. There's a unity to it. It all fits together, and none of it feels like it's made up by anybody.
It's nice to hear that. That's something that I worked really hard on, and I really made an effort while I was writing the story. Well, here's the thing. I've read fantasy my whole life. They were my first books. I started with Narnia, and then I did Pern and Tolkien. Even before I was reading, I was listening to the Hobbit soundtrack on vinyl. I had a read-along book from the old Bosch film, right?
Yep.
So it's like I practically suckled on fantasy. And, when you're 14 and you're 15 and you're reading these books, they're just cool.
Right.
You know, you're like, there's a dragon, awesome.
Yeah.
Sword, awesome. Wizard and a dragon, oh, this is the best book ever. But, you know, then you read 2,000 of these books, and they all start to get a little samey.
Yeah.
And I grow up and I go to college and I read Chaucer and I read Shakespeare and I read Gwendolyn Brooks and I read poetry and I read Cyrano de Bergerac and the best piece of drama ever. And it just destroys me. I'm like a shambling wreck after reading this play. And I weep for an hour about this story. And I think, why have I never read anything that has made me feel like this in the fantasy genre? And part of that is because I was not yet a very discriminating reader. There are these great books in fantasy, but, you know, especially back in the 80s, there was this big slushy mass of kind of okay books with dragons.
Right.
And so, you know, when I after I read Cyrano de Bergerac, I thought maybe I could tell a story about a character that is this cool, and it doesn't do all the cliche things that I did in my high school fantasy novel that made it really, really awful.
Well, I think you've done it, even down to the name of your character, which is virtually unpronounceable. Why would you give the guy whose name is going to be said the most Kavoth? Kvothe.
It's I wish I could say that I directly here I'll give you a lie as the answer. Actually, in Middle English, Kauth means to know.
Ah.
But that's not why. The truth is, I doodled it on my calculus notebook back in high school.
Oh, that's so great.
And then I tacked it onto a D&D character. And then I kind of arbitrarily stole it when I started this novel. And the character has really nothing to do with that old D&D character, but I like the name. And then, you know, once you've stuck with it for 10 years, the thought of changing that name, it just wouldn't work at all for me. And it's really ironic, considering one of the things I really wanted to avoid in the story in general was those overhyped, full of G's and Q's and apostrophes, that cliche fantasy name thing.
Right.
But yeah, the main character has that KV in it, and that's not a phenome that shows up in the English language very much. My Yiddish readers don't have any problem with it, though.
No, I love it. And you know what? No, Kavoth. He's Kavoth, of course. He's Kavoth. What are you talking about? No, I love it. And I'll tell you, names are a really good test of an author. And I don't know why it's so hard to make up fictional names that are real, but it is. And a great author, there's just something, you know, and it reminded me of the passage in Neil Stephenson's Reamdy, where they're talking about creating a universe. They actually hire a guy to create the universe who is a kind of a, is it Reamdy or is it, I think it is. Yeah.
I think it is Reamdy or Rem.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I mean, that's where he talks about this. And he talks about this whole notion of naming and a kind of a unified thing. I just think that that's it's a hard thing to do. And Kavoth is such an unexpected name. It doesn't sound made up.
Well, I think part of that is because it looks a little bit familiar, the way that the letters are put together.
Yeah.
It mirrors what shows up naturally in English.
Yeah.
And believe me, I've thought about these names.
I bet. All your names are perfect. All your names are great.
Well, and that's partly because I've had so long to work on these books, because I would put a name in, you know, like, honestly, there was a river in there for years, and the river's name was Borat.
Okay, that's got to go.
years before.
Right.
But then still before the movie came out, I kept looking at it. It bugged me because Borat isn't a good name for a river.
No, it's not.
Omethi is a good name for a river.
Omethi. Omethi is a good name for a river.
Yeah. And why? Well, I could talk your ear off for 2 hours about why. You have to be a bit of a word geek to really delve into this weird, how things sound and how they look in the page.
It's like Nepenthe. It's like it sounds like a dreamlike state. It echoes other words.
Yes, that's a big piece of it. And that's why, sometimes I'll do it when I'm teaching a class. I'll write up 2 made-up words on the board. I'll say, here's, Ogokwo, and here's Sliverith.
Right.
Which one of these words is wetter?
And why? Yeah.
And everyone
love it.
knows that it's Ogokwo.
Right.
And it's and I know that it's Ogokwo when I'm making up this word. Why? Well, because I'm a writer. That's why.
Because I know. The names, if you go to Patrick's blog or website, patrickrothfuss.com, you can see a map. Now, I have to tell you, Patrick, I've never held your books. I've only listened to audio. And they're wonderful on audible.com. But so I know the names, and tell me if I'm pronouncing them wrong, because maybe the reader's getting around Modeg and the Arturian Empire and the Sealed and Ventus and Omethi. He said that one right. Tarbean. These all sound like real places. This is a real place.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that color map because usually in the book it's black and white.
Yeah.
We have somebody contacted me and he said, "Would you like to do a poster of your world from space?" Because he does advanced 3D rendering.
Wow.
So I think we're going to work with him and actually do it. He showed me a tentative rendering of it, and I looked at it. I'm like, wow, it looks like it's taken from the space shuttle.
How cool!
So we'll do the poster and throw it up in the store for charity.
Good. I'll buy that. Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of it is because I've weeded out all of the awful names over the years, and hopefully the ones that are still a little awful, they're brushed by kind of quickly.
So now it's interesting. You've spent so much time. Do you feel that you've tired, or that you will tire of it? I mean, you've spent 20 years in this world. Well,
here's the thing. And here's what makes me different from a lot of authors, I think. Most writing is weird in that it is really the only hobby where your success is kind of measured by the unfair yardstick of you becoming a professional.
Yeah.
You think of it like if you build model trains, nobody asks, "So have you sold your model train set yet?" If you garden, nobody says, "Have you been in Better Homes and Garden yet?"
Right.
You're a writer. People say, "Oh, have you been published?"
Where have you been published? Yeah.
Right. And, because I'm a realist, because I'm a scientist at heart, I knew that the statistics were stacked against me ever getting this book published. And so I internalized that. I knew it truly in my heart. And then I was free to just write a book that I wanted to write and not worry if it was weird or if it was different or if it was unpublishable. And because of that, I was able to work on it for 7 years as a draft, telling the whole story, and then another 7 years revising it and trying to sell it.
Jeez Louise.
Without feeling like I was a failure.
No, because you were doing this. See, this is now. So you're like the classic D&D player, the classic geek in many respects. You were as much doing it for yourself as anybody.
Really, yes. I mean, did I want to get it published? Absolutely. I won't lie about that. But for me, the only purpose was not to publish. The purpose was to tell a good story. Yeah. And then I knew that ultimately the publication was kind of out of my control.
Right.
And it was unlucky. Because honestly, even back when I was doing it, and the publishing world was better back then than it is now, planning on being a professional fantasy writer and making your living at that, it's asinine behavior. I mean, it's sort of like saying, well, when I grow up, I'm going to win the lottery. This is my plan. I mean, you can write and try to get published. You can do things that earn you money as a writer, but you gotta know the facts. That's why I was going to get a chemical engineering degree so I could feed myself while I wrote.
So you knew you were going to write, but you also knew that you had to make a living, and you didn't want to have to make a living writing.
I didn't want to be forced to do the sort of writing that I knew I would have to do to make a living, like article writing or covering the town council meeting for $50 for the local paper. I kept the writing as my hobby, because if you write, if you have a hobby and you do it and you love it, then you win.
Right.
I mean, and then your life is full of joy. If you do a hobby and you expect to get rich and famous off it, and you don't, then you feel like a failure and you're miserable.
Even though it's exactly the same experience.
Yeah, it's the exact same experience, except expectations have really screwed you.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying people should follow my example, because, honestly, you can work on a fantasy novel for 14 years and then not get pushed,
Right. So,
but if you've enjoyed those 14 years, then it's a success.
Right.
So
how did you keep, I presume now you're making a full living as a writer, but before you published, what were you doing to keep body and soul together?
I was starving to death. The nice thing about taking, 9 years to finish your undergrad degree is that
you're a student for a long time.
Honestly, I learned how to live on like $6,000 a year.
Right.
I ate cheap. I lived in central Wisconsin. I never paid more than $200 a month rent. I had an unwise amount of credit card debt that slowly built up over the years. And, I learned how to cook. I learned how to eat ramen. I still enjoy ramen. And then eventually, actually fairly quickly, I realized that chemical engineering probably wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And then that's when I started my casual stroll through college. And eventually I thought maybe I could be a teacher. And then it was just an issue of picking what I was going to teach. And then eventually I picked English because it is my first love. Did a little grad school, and then I taught for years before the book got published.
Perfect. Somebody taught you at a very early age to believe in yourself, it seems like.
That I don't think I learned it. I don't think my parents sat down and had a meeting and said, we should really make sure Pat believes in himself. But the truth is, they supported me in my bad choices and my good choices. Mm-hmm. They loved me, and they were kind to me, and they provided an environment in which I could make mistakes and learn and try things. And they didn't try to force me to be a lawyer, a doctor, or an architect. And they let me find my own path, which is not to say that there were not a lot of jokes made around Thanksgiving about, so when are you ever graduating, But yeah, they believed in me, and so I kind of believed in me too.
That's neat. So they didn't say, "Oh, you really should get a skill and not pursue this writing thing."
There was some gentle parental concern going on there. My dad actually started, like, after I left for college, my dad started taking night classes, and he finished his college degree classes before I finished my college degree, like going mostly full time. So that was a little humbling there.
Have they read? They must have read your books.
They did. My mom actually passed away right before the first book came out.
I'm so sorry.
Which has complicated this whole experience for me. But she did read the first book. She read it in an early draft. She got to see it, even though she wasn't around when it hit the shelves. And she's missed a lot of this coolness, which is such a shame.
Yeah.
She before I did anything really worthwhile, she earned her bragging rights, and she didn't really get to cash them in. My dad's read them, and yeah, and he's listened to the audiobooks too. So yeah, they've been aware of the books for a long time.
Yeah, I'm reading the reviews on your website, and people like Orson Scott Card, who just don't hold back in your praise. Your publisher said this is the best fantasy novel I've read in 30 years in the business. I mean,
actually, just to say, I think she said it was the best first.
Okay, you're right.
Yep.
The most brilliant first fantasy novel I've read in over 30 years as an editor.
Yeah. Betsy is a marvel. She's an amazing editor, second generation editor, and the books would not be nearly as good if not for her, because she has given me good support, good feedback, and then space.
Right.
Which is something I think that reflects her skill and her experience in the job, because the first book came out, and it would be very reasonable for an editor to go, okay, it's successful, good reviews, people want the next one. Where is it? And I promised it a year later. I did like 30, 40 interviews with anyone who asked. And I said, this second book, I've already got the draft. It'll be out in a year. I promise. But I didn't know what it was like to write under a deadline. I knew what it was like to kind of dick around and be a hobby writer for 14 years. To say nothing of the fact that suddenly I was a part-time publicist and I was going to conventions, and I was dealing with the fact that my mom wasn't there anymore. It was like I'd had my legs really firmly kicked out from under me there. And the shift from enthusiastic amateur writer to pro writer was really hard, because I'd spent so much time being a useless hobbyist, a poor student. And suddenly I had grown up money and a house, and I was kind of a professional. I didn't know how to deal with that.
Yeah, I've heard other novelists talk about exactly that same transition and how difficult that is. And
I almost put together a pamphlet that says, you've published your book.
Now what?
Yeah. I've known a lot of really great authors, great people. They published their book finally after all these years, and they're a success, and they have money, and people know who they are, and their lives fall apart.
Yeah.
I think partly because we define ourselves as aspiring authors and striving to be published, and then suddenly you're on the inside, and you have to. It changes your whole life. It's really weird. Yeah.
What is World Builders?
Oh, that's my baby. That's my new hobby. Writing used to be my hobby, and now it's my job. So I need
You need a hobby.
It's a charity that I kind of started by accident. About a year after I was published, I had grown up money for the first time in my life, and so I thought I should do something worthwhile with this. I should donate some to charity. And then, because I'm a devious person, I thought, if I'm going to donate it anyway, maybe I can trick other people into donating and raise awareness of my favorite charity, which is Heifer International. And so
Heifer's cool because we bought a goat for somebody. You buy animals, right, for goats, sheep, chickens to give to families, and it turns out it could transform their lives in poor areas of the world.
In certain parts of the world, if you think about it, a goat is like a small business.
Right.
You drink the milk, get protein and calcium, you sell the extra milk. The goat has kids, literally kids. And then you give those kids to your neighbors, and then they have goats, and then their kids have milk. And, it changes a whole village. It changes a whole economy. But it's not just animals. Heifer also works with agriculture. They help people plant trees. They give people honeybees to improve the production in their farms. Plus, they get honey to sell. And they work on education and sustainable agriculture. And they're amazing. They're amazing. And so I thought, I'll donate $5,000 and I'll put up this little thermometer. And I say to everyone, everything you guys donate in the next month, I'll match it. And I didn't really know how many people were reading my blog at this point.
Whoopsie.
I didn't know kind of enthusiastic they could be. And $5,000 in 3 days. And then I went to my girlfriend. I'm like, can we afford to do more than this? And she's like, it's your money. And we did $10,000, and then we hit that, and then we did 15 and 20. And other authors offered to donate books, and people talked about it on their websites. And that first year we hit like $55,000. Absolutely bankrupted me. I had no money at all, and I almost had to go to debtor's prison because I hadn't set any money aside for tax. I wasn't used to, having to pay in for taxes. But it was great. It was great. I'd been broke before, but I'd never been broke for good reason. And we've done it every year since. And this year we've finally, we've raised more than $1.7 million. Yeah. It's a great collaborative effort. Authors, geeks, the folks at Think Geek have kicked in, people who create stuff donate, and we sell it. It really makes you feel good about the geek community. We're a cool bunch of people who really care about making the world a better place.
You can find out more about World Builders, the World Builders team, on Patrick's blog. It'll take you to Team Heifer at heifer.org, and you can see how they're doing. And then you have these goals, and you're perilously close to raising enough money this year for an erotic short story that you'll write with Amber Benson. But my favorite, which you're only about 50,000 off from, I have a feeling you might make it, is you, Trey, and Veronica Belmont will visit a heifer project in Nepal and report back. That's
now
cool.
This year's, we tend to run it for about 6 weeks, right over the holidays. So that period of time is when we do our main fundraising. We do a few other smaller events. We're going to have a booth at GenCon this year and at Origins where we sell merchandise and sign books. But I'm afraid we did not stretch goal.
Damn.
To see that erotic fan fiction with me and Amber. Resurrect that for next year's fundraiser.
So this is the 2012 one, but you did raise in 2012 $448,562, which is pretty amazing.
And then along with the calendar we did and matching donations, it was well over $100,000 this year.
Wow.
And next year's going to be way better because I finally brought in people to manage the fundraiser who are much smarter and better organized than I am. It's gotten way too big for me to handle myself.
Somebody in the chat room says he sent out the World Builders catalog for his Christmas presents.
That's what I do these days, too. A lot of people who...
Do you want to get that? Go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought I turned off the ringer.
That's okay.
A lot of people ask for heifer presents for their birthdays or for anniversaries. I used to give my mom a goat every Christmas. She loved it. It's one of the main reasons that I love heifer. It was our favorite charity together.
It's really fun too because here, Mom, here's a goat. Now you don't have to take care of it. But you're giving a goat to somebody else. I just love that. I think that's great. So again, no spoilers, because this is, everybody's just got to go out and read book 1 of the Kingkiller Chronicles, which is The Name of the Wind. Book 2, The Wise Man's Fear. So book 3 you're working on. What is the current status of it? And
it's complicated by the fact that, like, Brandon Sanderson amazes me constantly, because he writes so fast and he turns out this really quality product. And I was talking to him about it, one day. I'm like, could you dial it back a little bit? Because you make me look like a chump. You write 2 books a year and they're good. And he says, he goes, I'm not a language writer. He goes, I draft 3 times. I draft it, then I revise it, copy edits, and then I'm done. And I'm like, wow, I couldn't do that. Because for me, I've had a draft since the year 2000 of all 3 books. But they weren't good enough. They aren't the books that are in print now. I revised Name of the Wind, like, honest to God, like 400 times. I read through it and moved ththings around and add characters and fix the names so that they didn't sound corny. I'm honestly, I think it's fair to say that, like, nobody else in the industry revises as much as I do. And I can't really say I'm 78% done, because my drafting strategy, I've got to finish doing these things. Then I show it to my beta readers. I get feedback and I go, is this book really doing what I want it to? And I go in and tinker with it again to make sure everything is perfect and all the language is good and the tension is in the right place and the world is cohesive, because I'm obsessive, really, really obsessive.
I think you must be. That's so much work that it just makes me chilled to think of. It's terrifying. So the story's done, in other words. The arc, the whole thing is done. That's not what you're working on at this point. It's writing, rewriting, drafting, taking scenes in and out, and things like that. Are all the scenes in there? He's thinking. I think we're going to call him back.
Sometimes, actually, did I clip out?
You either you thought for a really long time, or the Skype paused you. Start over again. It was like, I'm frozen.
Well, when I originally drafted it, first off, right? When I was writing this, when I was finishing the thing in like 2000, or no, I'm sorry, like in 1998, I was not nearly the writer I am today. So I look at some of those things I wrote and I'm like, this is not up to snuff. This is not my best writing. So sometimes I have to add a scene or I have to expand a scene. Sometimes I've changed things in the first book where now I have to carry that change through the second and the third. So, and sometimes, there's something that I only mentioned and that I realize now, being a better storyteller, that I really need to expand this. And sometimes that means I add 50,000 words to the story, 60,000 words to the story in a subplot, because otherwise it would really disappoint the reader to get it just like summed up briefly.
Do you have is there an inspiration? Are there tales? I mean, Felurian, the fairy woman no man can resist. Is that out of whole cloth, or is that based on legends that you'd seen elsewhere?
That in some ways it's not like I thought, ooh, Bella Dame San Merci, that's cool. I want to slap a cheap coat of paint on that and I'll steal it for my world. Instead, like, I go on a fairy tale kick and I read every collection of fairy tales I can find for about a year and a half, and it sinks down into my subconscious. And then I think, oh, how would the Fae exist in my world? What would be interesting? What would be cool? What would fit with the cosmology that I've created? And then I write it, then I rewrite it, and then I see how people feel about it, and if it's achieving the effect that I want it to. And honestly, sometimes I make something, I create something, a language, a currency, and it never gets into the book. I make it, and I'm like, well, that's cool. It doesn't fit. I'll just put it over here. So it's more like these things accrete, like coral slowly growing over time, rather than I'm suddenly struck with inspiration.
That's an interesting analogy.
Yeah.
And it feels that way. It feels like it's built up, or maybe a pearl would be a better analogy, where you have the plot and you're building up layer over layer over layer over layer and polishing it to a fine sheen. Is that how it feels?
That's a much better. Pearls are definitely sexier than coral.
All right, we'll give you the pearl. Yeah, okay, and it feels like that. It feels like it is a very refined thing. Was it always in the first person?
It was actually the very first thing I wrote was in first person, where the first line was, "My name is Quoth," and he starts telling his story. It was only later that I went back and I added the frame to show you where he was telling the story from. Right. And why revision is important. The story would not work in any way the same way without that frame.
No, I love the frame.
Yeah,
and you drop out of the story every once in a while with an interlude in the frame, and I really love that construct. I think it works perfectly. It also gives you a chance to be third person once in a while.
It does. It's I wish I could claim that I planned for it to work that well, but I didn't. Somebody said, "Who's this guy?" And like, where is he telling this story? Who is he telling it to? And I went, well, that's a good question. Maybe, yeah. And so I added the frame, and then I had to populate this world, and I had to build the Waystone Inn, and then I had to, kind of create the world around it. And it's given me a lot of useful tools for creating tension or breaking tension.
Yeah.
It's just like the Princess Bride,
Right.
She isn't eaten by the eels at this time, you realize.
That's exactly right. I didn't put the two together, but that's the same device. Yeah.
It really is. And I think it's a huge compelling part of why the story works the way it is, because you get both of those views. But honestly, everybody kind of says, wow, first person. But truthfully, first person is the most natural storytelling mode. When you sit down with your friends, you don't say, once upon a time, there was a boy. You say, I was driving here and some jackhole cut me off in traffic.
Right.
Most of our storytelling and the stories we hear day to day are first person.
But it's technically difficult. I mean, you add all sorts of trouble.
It's hard to bring information into the story if your main character does not directly perceive it.
Right.
I've learned some real tricks to make that first person work. Yeah.
But it does. It does. And now, the other thing that I think is interesting is that, for me, at least as a reader, the frame has taken on an important life, because I feel that that's how the novel will end. That he will complete his story, but the novel will not be over until the frame comes to it. You set up stuff in the frame that we've got to understand.
A lot of people.
Yeah. What are your primary influences? Obviously, you read a ton, but what are your primary influences?
I don't know. It's that question always trips me up, because I feel like I should say, when I was a kid,
right.
I read a book, and it made me realize it was worth living. But I don't have any stories like that. I mean, I read The Last Unicorn, and
Peter Beagle.
By Peter S. Beagle, and realized that the language can be beautiful to a degree that I will never be able to match. And so I didn't sit down to write like him, but I thought I should be able to still make beautiful language in my own way. Cyrano de Bergerac is definitely an influence where I thought, what a beautiful, tragic, bold, brash, arrogant ass of a character. I want someone that will break the reader's heart. I read the first 6 volumes of Cassanov's memoirs that he wrote when he was exiled from France for being a pervert and being himself. And reading that memoir was fascinating because I'm like, wow, he's just talking about like the things that happened to him in his life. There's no plot. Everything doesn't tie up neatly in a bow. There's no dragons and swords and magic, but this is a profoundly compelling story because he's an interesting person living in interesting times. And then I thought, I wonder if I could do this in a story. And it turns out I can.
I think of Marion Zimmer Bradley a little bit when I read your stuff, only because it's a similarly detailed universe. Now, she's really rewriting Arthurian legends, so she has kind of a given plot that she's working with, but she adds quite a bit.
Oh, yeah, very much so. One of the comparisons, and actually you mentioned earlier that you said, I must hate the Harry Potter for grown-ups reference, but I really don't. I understand where that comes from. Where people, if you want to describe it to somebody who doesn't know, you have to have a cultural reference.
Well, and it's a coming-of-age story.
It's magic. There's a university, a young boy. What amazes me is that comparison doesn't get made very much. It actually happens much, much more rarely than I ever thought it would, because the feel of the stories is so drastic.
Yeah. Well, it's not a young adult novel, and frankly, it's so much better written. But I almost hesitate to say it to you. I mean, I say it to friends when I'm trying to describe kind of the idea, but I would hesitate to say it to you because it sounds like almost like an insult, and not intended as an insult to you or to Harry Potter, but it's just very different. Thing. And yet I love coming-of-age stories. And the other thing that's very similar is Kvothe's friends are very important to the story.
Yeah, if you're telling, what I wanted to do is skip a lot of the traditional cliche things that happen in a lot of fantasy novels, because I've known people who have, because we've read the story of a boy and his 4 friends get together and save the world from certain destruction, right? Apocalypse can get really boring once you've read it 400 times.
Right.
But you know what never, and then what do you first, how do you follow up? And unless you're Joss Whedon, you really can't do it effectively. And so you don't have to deal with that escalation if what you're doing is telling the story of a person, because a person's life is sufficiently dramatic. A person's life can give you enough drama and humor and emotional impact than any number of dragons and carpets and clashing armies. Then you can go and tell the story of a different person's life and not have to worry about escalation, about somehow doing an encore to the apocalypse. That's why you could never really get Lord of the Rings 2, because the whole world is effectively used up in the story that Tolkien told.
Right.
Where I wanted to create this world, tell a story in it, and then later tell more stories because there are more interesting people in the world. I don't know. Was I answering a question there? I kind of lost track of what I was doing.
I did too, and I was enjoying it, though. I was enjoying the ride. Just the fact that the friends are so important to the narrative.
Right. Because if you're telling the story of a person's life, what's really going to be important to him is these personal relationships.
Yeah.
Unless you're doing something very weird and postmodern, or he's a sociopath or something.
Right. And also, we love the hero. I mean, from James Bond to Superman to Harry Potter, we love the hero. And Kvothe is he's not an anti-hero. He's actually a hero who's vastly misunderstood, constantly.
It's interesting to hear people talk about him, where I wanted to really leave some things up to the reader to decide for themselves. Where, we know who Superman is. We know that he is the good guy. We know he's about America and apple pie and all those things. And we know who Batman is, right?
Yeah.
Troubled sociopath that he is. But, I didn't want Kvothe to be a simple character, easily. Yeah. I wanted him to be real.
Yeah.
I wanted him to feel real. And that means if you meet a real person, you're not going to like everything that he does.
Right.
You don't meet a real person and go, wow, that's a hero. Or, wow, what a great, Hemingway anti-hero or something like that. He's a person, he's a man. And so your relationship, I would hope, would be really complicated with him.
It is. And in fact, you do. Sometimes you go, Kvothe. You, what? Oh, dear.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's when you know, by the way, it's working. I mean, and some of that's from just the length of the world and the detail of the world. You really becomes part of your life. But also he is really a great hero that you really can become invested in and are fascinated with the ups and downs of his life. And that's, I think, the key to the success of the novel, and why so many of us can't wait to find out, well, what happens to him? Why do they call him the Kingkiller?
When I put that title on the series, I did not realize that itself would really become such a hook that people would constantly speculate about, because there's a lot of things that are talked about in the story. It's like, I do this, I did this, and you get to know the legend of this man, and then you start learning that these legends aren't always what the general population believes are true. There's sort of a kernel of truth that these legends have grown out of. But yeah, listening to everyone speculate about what really happened is it.
It must be fun for you. It must be really fun because of course And what do you think?
I'm glad that people are getting joy out of that the world feels rich enough and cohesive, and that they feel like time spent speculating is time well spent.
Yes.
And that's the other reason that I really am careful with this, because I don't want to just dash off some crap that leaves people disappointed. I really want to write the best book possible. I want to write something that's going to be worth reading twice. That's going to be worth reading in 50 years, hopefully.
Oh, I think you have. I think you've created absolutely a modern classic that will live on. I'm sure you've been approached about optioning it for a movie.
There's been actually movie talk off and on since before it actually hit the shelves. That's a whole world of weirdness right there.
Well, and it's going to have to be a Game of Thrones style thing, because there's a lot going on here. This is not one movie.
And that's eventually what I kind of decided is, we got some fairly serious inquiries, and even to do it as a movie, the problem is every successful fantasy movie so far has been an action movie.
Right.
My book isn't an action movie. It's got drama.
There's a lot of action.
You know, think about that first book. You know, there's no sword fight. There's no car chase.
Right.
There's no explosion.
Right.
Okay, there's one explosion. You know, but it's a coming of age story. It's the story of a person's life. And the drama can't come from clash. And so I really am anxious. I was anxious about them trying to turn the story into an action movie, which would really ruin it. I think a TV show would be much better. It would give the characters room to breathe, the people time to get invested in the story and the world. But if something like that were in the works, odds are that I would be contractually obliged not to speak of it.
Should be HBO, and it should go on for years. And we'll just leave it at that. Hey, it's really been a thrill to talk to you, Patrick. I cannot thank you enough. It's rare when you get a book that just engrosses you so much. Do you mind that people listen to it instead of read it? Do you have an opinion on that?
Not at all. I've really come to love audiobooks because I am so busy. I don't get to just sit and read the way I used to, in the way I kind of need to keep my head screwed on straight. Instead, what I'll do is, if I'm driving somewhere, I'll listen to an audiobook. If I'm cleaning the house or doing chores, I'll listen to an audiobook. And I know Nick Podell, the narrator of the one here in the U.S., a lot of people have said very nice things about him. So I think he's really done a bang-up job. I can't listen to it, unfortunately, because it's like hearing my voice on an answering machine.
Yeah.
It sounds in my head, and the way that, and the way that he reads it isn't the way that it sounds in my head. There's also one version in the UK that I'm kind of excited about, because that has a British accent. Rupert Degas reads that, and I've heard great things about that one too, because British accent is very posh.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I've only heard Nick Podell's narration, but I think he does a bang-up job of it. And it's funny, and if you listen to audiobooks, this is true, that he has to do the third book. It's because it's just all of one piece, and it was a huge issue in the Game of Thrones when Roy Dotrice couldn't do the 5th volume. People were livid, and of course Roy came back and did do it. So I hope Nick continues and does the 3rd volume. I hope you finish the 3rd volume. I was just looking. Book 1 of the Kingkiller Chronicles is almost 28 hours. Book 2 is 42 hours. So you're talking, I've been listening to your world for about 74 hours. That's good. That's good. And I feel that I can imagine what's going on right now in the inn with Kvothe and Chronicler and Bast sitting around that table. And I'm dying to listen in, but I'm just going to have to wait until we get the 3rd book.
And because I've realized, part of what held me up so long with book 2 is I kind of convinced myself that I really needed to be a professional and a grown-up and just work on book 2. And what happened was it really crowded me up. And now I know writing a few side projects actually helps me keep my sense of fun and my sense of play. And the added bonus is that I've got some stories coming out this year.
Oh, good.
A couple novellas that I'm putting the touches on. I've got a story in an anthology coming out called Unfettered. That should maybe be out only in a month or so. My very first short story publication. So those will be happening probably throughout the coming year. And all of them are set in this world, in the Four Corners world. And so people taste of that and some of the characters they to know, even if you get your hands on book 3 yet.
I can't wait. You, it says on Wikipedia you're doing a podcast called The Storyboard. Are you still doing that?
I did it a while through Felicia Day's Geek and Sundry channel. Second season, they changed direction a little bit, and they didn't continue any of their hangouts, but which I completely understand. So I'm probably going to continue doing it by myself because it was a ton of fun, and I finally feel like I was hitting my stride around the 6th, 7th, 8th hangout together with other artists, storytellers, and different media, and we talk about storytelling and how it works in games. And I want to do one about comics, and we did one with Will Wheaton, blogettes, and John Scully about effectively memoir, modern memoir. It was brilliant. It was a ton of fun. So yeah, I'll keep doing those. They probably just won't be on the first of the month schedule like we did with Geek and Sundry.
Well, let us know if you need any help with production or back end. We'd be glad to participate in any way.
Boy, that I'm a bit of a Luddite, in all honesty. I have not been.
Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come out there and give you a big fat internet pipe.
You know, this is so irritating. I normally don't have. Maybe there's a solar flare or someone off my Wi-Fi or something. Eventually, we're going to move this into the new space. We had to buy a new building for World Builders because of all the books that get done. And there we are going to have like a big fat hardwired pipe so that when I do interviews, I don't get all grainy like this and lag out.
Good. Well, and anything we could do to help, I would love to, be glad to help you in any way. Here's a picture of Patrick and his World Builders assistant sending out a ton of stuff. Look at that. Look at all those books. Wow.
Yeah. That's one of the draws to the fundraiser. If you donate in our particular window when we're running the active fundraiser, you're automatically entered into the lottery in a bunch of cool books, a lot of them signed, donated by the authors, some of them are print, some cool stuff.
It's so, the internet is great because it gives us a chance, no matter what area that we're interested in or whatever, there's a chance to build a community around it and to have fun. And I just, it's amazing what's happening. And so glad to get to talk to you, thanks to the internet, Patrick Rothfuss.
It's a ton of fun because here living in central Wisconsin, there's not a lot of opportunities to talk with people about books and do interviews and actually kind of engage the social side this way. The writing can be a solitary enterprise. Yeah.
I bet. Well, we're so glad. We'll have you back anytime you want.
That sounds great. Maybe when book 3 is like gearing up to launch, we'll get in there and we can talk about it a little more.
Well, how long is that going to be? That sounds like a long time from now.
I learned the lesson with you to not give a date because then I might have to, through no power, break that promise. So all I can say is that it is forthcoming. And I promise that it will be good, but I cannot promise that it will be fast.
No, and we don't care. You know what? I have such respect for your process. It works so well. Polish all you want. We'll wait. But I will have you back the day that you're ready to talk again. Thank you, Patrick Rothfuss.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
PatrickRothfuss.com. You can get his books, of course, on Audible and on Amazon and at your favorite bookstore. You must read the Name of the Wind, book 1 of the Kingkiller Chronicles, and then read The Wise Man's Fear, book 2 of the Kingkiller Chronicles. What's the third book going to be called?
It's at this point the title has kind of been leaked, my tentative title. I've always thought of it as The Doors of Stone. My editor doesn't love that title, but at this point, so many people have picked that up, and it's on Amazon to read. People have been reading it on Goodreads. I went in myself and actually like wrote a review thanking all the time travelers for coming back in time and reviewing my book.
That's a different kind of fan fiction. Reviews of a book that has not yet been released.
Yeah, but it'll be hard to move away from that name for me because I really think Doors of Stone is the right title. But officially, I have not conferred and confirmed it with my editors, so we'll have to say tentative title, The Doors of Stone.
I like it though because it makes me think that those lodestones that have been such a big part of the story all along might have more to them than meets the eye. You've been hinting around about this.
You're a good reader, I'll say that.
I can't wait. PatrickRothfuss.com, that's the place to go to read Patrick's blog, to look at the color map, to see what he's up to get, of course, the books. You've got to read the Kingkiller Chronicles. Trey Ratcliffe told me, you can't be my friend if you don't love these books. You can't be my friend unless you love these books. So there, go out and read them. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you so much. You're terribly kind.
Take care. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. We do Triangulation every Wednesday around about 4 p.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m. Pacific. That's 6 or 7 p.m. Eastern time on twit.tv. Watch live. It's always great. We follow the chat room with interest. In fact, it's funny because somebody in the chat room said, ask about The Last Unicorn, and then Patrick just said The Last Unicorn. It was like, ooh, either that or he's in the chat room. That's possible too. You can be in the chat room, but if you can't watch live, just come on and download it. twit.tv/TRI. It'll be episode 100 next week. 99 fantastic interviews. You can also subscribe so you don't miss a one. We're on iTunes and the Xbox music player and all of that stuff. Just look for Twit or Triangulation. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week on Triangulation. You've just seen an interview with Patrick Rothfuss. But now, for those of you who have read the books, and if you haven't read the book, you turn it off right now. Patrick and I are going to talk a little bit more about The Name of the Wind and the Kingkiller Chronicles, but we'll do it, for the people who've read it. So get ready. Spoiler alert. Patrick and I are now going to talk about some stuff. It won't be too bad. Won't be too bad, but, and then save this and you can watch it after you read the book, right?
Yeah, that's the best way to do it.
Doors of Stone, huh? And you've got, I love that, it's so hard to talk about without spoilers, but these aren't spoilers. But I love it that you don't have dragons, you have Dracus. Dragons aren't real.
And that was actually funny because the Dracus was something I created just kind of to amuse myself. And then I was rewriting the book, and years ago I can bring it in.
Loved it. Yeah, it feels like that. It was like there was a book. You had a book about the Dracus, the common Dracus, and you just wanted to throw that in there. Wonderful.
There was just a little flavoring of it in there before. Yeah, I've always considered writing, make up that book, like this imaginary, this bestiary in my fictional world to write the mating habits of the common Dracus.
Well, but see, this is why when you create a world like this, unless you get bored of it, it's endless because you have all these different pathways to follow now. I'm very interested in the warrior class that you created and their culture, which is fascinating and different and is what I love it is, as I was reading, I'm thinking, well, this is kind of how people probably felt about Japan or China, that they're of the same race, but they're so different. It's almost as if they're aliens. And the gesture language. How did you come up with that?
Well, it's one of the reasons I did that was what I wanted to do is tell a different, like a less cliche sort of fantasy story. But unfortunately, in the first book, most of the action takes place in place that is not entirely dissimilar to like Renaissance Europe.
Right.
where everyone speaks the same language. It's fairly homogenous. You have noble classes and whatever. And so I wanted to show that there are parts of the world that are like really legitimate different. And so then that, that's why we go to the ADEM, where it's a matriarchy, and they've got an entirely different set of cultural values. They're sex positive.
But wait, but this is the best part. They don't think, and this one just kind of blew my mind, that sex has anything to do with reproduction.
Yep. Which, and you know what's funny is I still occasionally get an email from people saying, "Come on, Rothfuss, this is some silly bullshit that you got." It's like, and I'm like, that both like just went to fairyland and somebody made him a man. And you didn't bat an eye at that. Whereas this actual cultural phenomenon, you're really having a problem with. But truthfully, there have been a lot of cultures which have firmly believed what the ADEM believe.
Right.
ADEM exists to this day. I can't remember the name of the island, but they will. They'll laugh at your like silly European ass. You come there, you start talking about being a dad.
Yes, and that's both. But that's what's great, because the implication of having mating separate from reproduction is that men have nothing to do. And I loved how you developed that. I thought that was great. Just so my point being, there's so many ideas, and I'd love to see another story in the ADEM. There's so many things going on here. I'd love to know more about the mayor and that life. And it's wonderful. The elevators that carry the citizens up. I can see it all. It's wonderful, wonderful.
You mentioned the ADEM, and it's really interesting because in my initial draft of the book, I was writing it, and I always think of the story as the book. It's like capital T, capital B in my head. But I eventually realized it was going to have to be more than one book, because I knew that the story was really getting ridiculously long. So when I did my initial draft, I knew he wanted to go there, learn this language, learn how to fight, and then he had to get back to the story. Like if there is a main plot line, he had to get back to it. But what happened is, my editor read it, and she's like, he spends like 4 chapters in the ADEM. You've talked about it a lot leading up to it. People are going to be really upset. And so I'm like, can I add to that? She's like, yeah, you can. Because again, Betsy is brilliant, and she lets me write a longer book.
That's neat.
And so I ended up adding 60,000 words.
Wow.
And then it allowed me to flesh out the whole gesture language, the whole different cultural mores, the teaching culture, the concept of the Lethani.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's what a good editor does for a book, is gives you the advice to really make the book the way you want it to be. And in my case, she gave me the freedom to do that, because, those 60,000 words don't come fast.
Right.
And then like integrating them properly into the book, I had to go backwards and work all that in the mercenary section before, so that it felt very cohesive. And yeah, the book is so much better for it. But with a different sort of editor, she would have said, Rothfuss, it's been 3 years. Right. How about you turn the crank a little bit, and we like pay our bills.
This is so worth it. But what she's going to get out of this is there could be a whole Edemre saga. I want to know more about this warrior class. The gesture language. Had you ever heard of anything like that before? That's completely innovative.
That one was out of whole cloth, out of my head. That. I came up.
So this is not a spoiler by any means, but this culture Quoth first becomes aware of it because they talk very close to one another. They're close talkers. And then he realized there's no facial expressions. It's considered only among family. Smiling at somebody is like farting in public. That you only have these facial gestures among your family because otherwise, but everything's expressed.
Yeah.
We need that for Skype, by the way.
Actually, if you could add the some of the gestures to emails, it would probably really help convey emotional content. That would be funny. I should see if I could talk to, as if I need another project, talk to some savvy web developer where you could have the ADEM hand talk application that'll like slide into your email. I'd have to come up with the hand talk dictionary.
Well, I was wondering, do you have in your mind some of these gestures?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, you described some of them. So those are, those are obviously.
The tricky bit, of course, is eventually, I don't describe them physically all the time. Eventually, I just end up adding their emotional connotation in parenthetical because, they really are as subtle and varied as a facial expression. And, but imagine trying to write a dictionary where you describe this.
You can't, right. That's an interesting point about the audiobook because that might be the one place where the audiobook leaves a little bit to be desired. I gathered that they were parenthetical, but it's not immediately obvious. You can tell, he's talking along and then he'll add an emotion or a feeling or a concept, and you gather that they're parenthetical, but you don't see, I figured, well, he must be doing something, italicizing them or something. But you don't see that, and so he has to do that with his voice.
And actually, you are right. It was italics, and so you got that visual cue in the book. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
In terms of the audiobook, but that's where the narrator earns his bread and butter is by trying to somehow.
And I think he did that well because it was subtle. It wasn't like sotto voce or something where, quietly. But it was parenthetical enough that you realize this is not spoken word dialogue. This is something else. And because maybe I was able to figure it out because I was kind of got that this is going on in the background. Maybe some people might be a little bewildered by these sudden interjections in the dialogue. Oh,
well, it was introduced slowly enough that people were able to pick that that's really what was going on with those adjectives or descriptors that followed a piece of text.
Oh, I just love it, and I love it that the first ADEM that he meets turns out to be kind of a screw up. but all, for the first 2, 3 chapters or whatever, you're like, whoa, this guy's amazing, and it turns out, yeah, he's all right.
And actually, one of the things is because I wanted to bring in a legitimately different culture with legitimately different beliefs, and one of those, of course, is where instead of being kind of a patriarchal culture, this one is the women do kind of run things. And the temptation there is to get kind of moralistic and to show how, if only the women ran things, we would have this kind of utopia. But what you really see is kind of this other type of sexism.
Right. It's a different kind of screw up.
And whenever anybody talks about Tempe, they're like, well, he's nice,
For a guy.
Yeah. For a guy, he's an okay fighter, but he's because guys are kind of thick. And he's nice in the sack, but really, would you want him, in your country out there as a mercenary? Nah, not that good. And I didn't make a big point of it, but if you read through it, you realize that almost any time, any of the women refer to a man, they're kind of derogatory, kind of like gently, obliviously derogatory toward them. where it's like they're around, they have their uses, but really you can't trust them with anything complicated.
I love that. I absolutely adored that. Oh,
Yeah.
everybody,
Yeah.
the whole staff has read this now because we talk about it so much and proselytize so much, and we're all fans. We're all big fans of the books.
I've actually, one thing I didn't mention is that I've owed somebody a novella for like 4 years, and I finally sat down to try to write it. And because I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm doing as a writer, I was shooting for about 20,000 words, and I stopped at around 60. And what it is I set out to kind of tell one of the mythic stories of the world, the story of Lanael Young again, who's mentioned just once or twice in the book. And she is from Modeg. And in terms of like a different culture, like you never go to Modeg in these first 2 books.
Right.
And like, I think the most that's said is like at one point, I think Will Simon is, they're talking about Fella, and they go, well, she's from Modeg.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh yeah, those Modegan women, which is partly because of like a confused cultural understanding of the fact that in Modeg they have a sort of formalized education of women that includes a sort of courtesan element. And those people are like a valued member of that culture. So, but what I set out to do is tell this woman's story, Lanael's story, in this world. But in doing that, I had to explore the world and expand it, make it clear to the reader. And so that's going to end up being a novel in its own right.
Oh, good.
A novel for me, maybe like 90,000 words. But I had a ton of fun writing that. Bringing in this new character and showing off this piece of the world that we haven't seen before. So that'll be cropping up eventually.
Oh, and what will that be called?
That is very, very much to be determined, mostly because, like, calling it The Tale of Lanael Young again is just not a good title for a book.
Unless you've read the Kingkiller Chronicles, in which case it's a perfect title. I want to show people, you can buy on his store, you can buy the Aeolian Bar t-shirt, which I think I might buy with his pipes right on there. That looks really cool. They've got first editions. Here's all Kvoth's names on a t-shirt.
We had a contest a while back, and people voted on their favorite ones, and then we've got about, I think, 4 or 5 shirts now. We're probably going to do some more later this year.
And then you have a misprint Aeolian t-shirt. You should charge more for that, I think.
Oh yeah, it's limited edition.
Exactly. You're missing a real good bet here. Oh, look, Dena's ring. Who made that?
Yeah.
Aeolian talent pipes?
Yeah, that was my first licensing deal. The folks at Badali Jewelry made those talent pipes, and they're gorgeous, perfect. And then they worked with me on Dena's ring and produced something that's just gorgeous, despite the fact, like, they sent me prototypes, and I would look at them, I'm like, wow, these are beautiful. But now that I think of it, it should be like this. And so they take it back to the drawing board, and then they bring it to me, and I'm like, and then I go, oh, of course, Dena's ring wouldn't have like flowers on it. She wouldn't wear that. And then I go, oh, now I know. Now I know what a ring would be like. And so they ran through like 3 prototypes and designed this beautiful ring, really to my specs, and never raised an eyebrow at me being the waffling, inconsiderate ass that I truly am.
Oh, but it's gorgeous. And it has blue topaz instead of smokestone in it. Oh, this is so cool. This is so cool. It's neat. Now, this is when you know that you have created a universe, when there's people buying Aeolian pipes and Denna's ring. I mean, that's really great. That's really great.
It is really neat. And all the everything in the store, all the proceeds go to world builders to kind of, you know, fund the staff, you know, that we have, you know, that kind of things running now, and you know, help out with donations to Heifer, so money goes to a good cause.
Yeah. Well, I want Telu's iron wheel pendant. Always good to have a bit of iron around.
And you know what's neat is the Ollie. I was like, this would be a cool thing to make, and they're like, yeah, it would be cool. And they're like, yeah, we could make it out of silver. And I'm like, you know, it really should be iron.
Yeah.
And they're like, people don't make jewelry out of iron. It's like awful to work with, and there's you don't do it. Nobody does it. And I'm like, well, could you do it? And they're like, well, look. And so, you know, it's actually iron.
It has to be iron, or it won't protect you against demons. Come on.
Exactly. They, you know, they actually like found a place fairly close to them that does this. So they're not only supporting local business and all of that, but it's real iron jewelry, which
that's so neat.
You just won't be able to else.
Can't get that anywhere. Did you the whole arcana that you created, is that also of whole cloth, the idea of bindings?
You know, it's actually, part of it is me, part of it is it actually follows in the actual Renaissance tradition of Hermetic magic.
Okay.
You know, where the concept of like the doctrine of signatures and
right.
If you've ever read, God, was it Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum?
Mm-hmm.
He talked about, you know, these beliefs in the Renaissance, that there really was the idea,
like attracts like, and can control like, and all that. Yeah.
And even voodoo, you know, it's a very deeply rooted human belief.
That's right, because you've got the dolls, and yeah.
Or a piece of hair somehow let someone control you.
But that's what makes it all very believable, because it all just it feels right. There's a sense of it feeling right that I cannot quantify, but it just does.
I think that's partly the result of me being having those strong scientific roots, where I want to know how everything fits together.
Right.
And then don't explain it really explicitly in the books. Hopefully, you know that there is a functioning economy here.
Right.
You know that if there's a city of upwards to 1 million people, there is a functioning sewer system and an elaborate series of trade mechanisms that feed those people, you know, and as well as the magic system, as well as, you know, to a certain extent, the system of governance. That's the other thing that really slows me down when I write, because, you know, I say, oh, I want to use the word ballywick. And then I go, and then I look it up, and I'm like, if I use the word ballywick, that means that I have to have bailiffs in my world, you know, because that's where technology comes from. And I won't let myself cheat like that. Or if somebody gets arrested and the constable comes, then I really have to understand like how the legal system works in my world.
And you have a very elaborate legal system that has a matching parallel church legal system. I mean, the detail.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
and so
there's only one. Occasionally, there's some anachronistic slang. Like I think at one point, Dana or somebody says, "You think." I mean, maybe it's fella.
It could be. But actually, the truth is, you can be, well, and in some ways, bringing up the concept of anachronism at all begs the question of
Yeah, it's not a real world. Yeah.
speaking English, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So too far down that rabbit hole, you will descend into madness.
Well, that's exactly what I decided, which was, oh, but this is just a modern translation of the language they were actually speaking. And that's exactly what I decided.
Yeah, and you kind of have to let that go by the wayside. And I try not to bring in words that are going to break that spell. For example, nobody can have Spartan living arrangements.
Right. Wow.
Because
you think about things like that. Wow.
Oh, I think about that all the time. And honestly, I use the term monkish, you know, and then I'm like, oh boy, that means there's monks. That implies church. Because it's one thing to have a church that believes in deity and the concept of angels, but like once you bring monks in it too, then this looks an awful lot like Catholicism, and it's weird to have Catholicism in this world.
Right.
Yeah, I'm constantly walking a tightrope between doing something that is enough like our sensible world that people can easily digest it and understand it, but doesn't feel so much like our world that it bugs people or that it feels anachronistic. And speaking of anachronistic language, like all of the really great cussing, they're old words, which I love. And I'm very proud of myself that I've gone like almost an hour and a half here and have not said any really.
So you like to cuss a little bit.
Got a filthy mouth. I'm like but
you have very good creative cussing in this book.
Well, and that's just it, because even though, you know, like these words are actually very, very, very old, you know, and the F word, God, I feel like such a third grader when I say the F word. It's an ancient word, you know, it goes all the way back to the Germanic, you know, feken, to strike.
Right.
You know, it's perfectly non-anachronistic, but if you put it in a book, it feels anachronistic because it's modern slang.
Right.
You know, same thing, you know, if somebody says shite, well, to the US ear, that feels a little more in keeping, but not to the British ear.
Right.
That feels a little bit more like modern slang.
Right.
I think a lot about cussing because what's considered vulgar in a culture actually reveals a lot about the culture. And you can use that to do what I consider guerrilla world building, where I'm not going to give you 3 paragraphs describing like how the dairy industry works. I'm going to slide stuff into conversation, subconsciously informs you as to the nature of the culture and the beliefs that are.
That's just marvelous. That's just marvelous. That's wonderful. That's magic right there. That's alchemy right there. Patrick, I've kept you too long. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's grateful for me too. Thank you so much. And you're just a marvelous interviewer. I have to say that.
Oh, thank you. I'm just a fan.
Well, no, I've done a lot of interviews, and this was just lovely. And I apologize if I got a little rambling in my answers. That's kind of my way.
Oh no.
So
No. I like rambling answers.
Okie doke. Well, I will see you around, and we'll totally set for like when book 3 is coming out.
Good. And if you ever get out to the Bay Area, let us know. I'd love to get you up here.
That'd be great. I was actually out there doing sword and laser, you know, 3-4 months ago.
Were you in our building?
I was in your building and everything. Yeah.
Those sons of bitches. They didn't tell me.
San Francisco is a great place. You've got great bookstores out there.
Oh yeah, we love it out here. You should be living here, although you'd never get anything done. So it's probably good you're in the wilds of Wisconsin.
is a certain amount of isolation keeps me productive. So it won't be too long before I'm out there again. I'll swing by and maybe we can do this in person and not worry about Skype.
I can't believe I knew Tom and Veronica interviewed you. I didn't know you were going to be here.
Yeah, we timed it with another trip and a training over at and Books.
I'm gonna just plots. All right,
I promise.
Next time. Oh, I was on a cruise. That's why. All right. Thank you, Patrick.
I'll see you later.
Take care. Bye-bye.
I'm vehemently anti-spoiler.
Good.
But honestly, for me, like, I don't want people spoiling my first read of something, my first watch of a movie.
Right.
But I know that a lot of people don't care, and that's their business. So it's like, if you want to hear about the book or you want to read the last, yeah, like I know some people read the last chapter of a book before they read the book.
Horrible.
Which is really their business. If they want to go to hell for something like that, then they're entirely within their own rights.
It's your choice.
Because only really severely mentally damaged people would read the last chapter of a book before you read the book.
Crazy.
I mean, seriously, people.
Patrick, I read Game of Thrones before I would watch the TV show. I mean, I do, and I far prefer to be spoiled by a book, then see the movie, than vice versa. So, I always do that. And in fact, I won't see The Life of Pi, the movie. I don't care how good it is. That's just not going to happen.
Because you love the book so much?
Because the book is so brilliant. And that's a good example of a book that has such a significant twist at the end that if you saw the movie first, you'd just spoil one of the great pieces of literature. And that would be such a shame. But it happens, I'm sure, all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, honestly, that's why I haven't watched The Hobbit. Because I love the book.
Yeah, it's totally not related to the book.
Yeah, I know.
There's some stuff. It's almost like a kid's movie. I liked it, and it's well done. But boy, if you think the book is sacrosanct, you should not see the movie.
Well, and honestly, it's like I grew up with the old Rankin and Bass version. You know,
that was fun.
Birds in 5-foot trees.
This is not worse than that. I can't say this is worse than that.
And I really enjoyed that. And like, I'm gonna watch that with my boy.
Right.
And I'm reading The Hobbit now. He's 3.5, and he likes Andy's Bilbo Baggins. But I know I'm gonna watch it, and I'm gonna see that they added a bunch of stuff.
There's a bunch of stuff that's not in the book.
To no good purpose.
Right.
Just to stretch out.
That's exactly right.
This thing into 3 movies so that they can make money off of people. I refuse to encourage that behavior with my money.
That's exactly
my rage.
Yeah.
My rage
they
is
take one line about
They
take one line about Radagast the Brown, and they make it a big chunk of the movie. And it's so bad, so nothing like anything Tolkien would ever write, that it's just offensive. I mean, I still liked it. I'm not saying I didn't like the movie. I did, but it's just a different thing. It's a separate kind of thing. And if my mom read me The Hobbit when I was a kid, and you should read it as a kid, and you should read it with those old pen drawings, and that's how it should be. And then think of the movie as something completely unrelated.
Yeah. For me, because I'm willing to admit that I have a problem, it's almost gotten to the point where, like, I've found a use for alcohol. I'm not a big drinker. But I found that, like, if I have a good stiff drink before I go to watch a movie, it dulls my critical faculties to the extent where I can enjoy it. And some movies are 2-drink movies.
Yeah, or more.
And some movies are 3-drink movies.
Yeah.
And like, if a movie is a no-drink movie, that's a really good movie. Boy, if I can enjoy it.
I'm going to adopt this system, Patrick. This is brilliant.
It opens up a whole new world for people like us. because like I watched Underworld and it was awesome. It was like I had glasses on, I was looking at this woman's leather-clad ass, and I was laughing my ass off. I was in the bag.
You had to have been.
I enjoyed the hell out of that movie. This is what booze is for.
Brilliant. Brilliant. You have that was a 5 drinker, says Morris in our chat room. You have just given me a way to see this crap.
I think that should be how movies are rated from now on. It's like how many to enjoy this. And then on the far end of the scale, there's a no drink movie.
Right.
And then there is the you will die from alcohol poisoning before you could enjoy this movie. That's the
I think this is brilliant. I think we have to do this. We have to do a movie review show now. That is great.
Yeah. Oh.
So, and I was sincere. If you want technical assistance, if you want to, stream the Hangout live here, I mean, of course, you'll be doing it on YouTube and Google Plus too. Whatever you want, I would work with you, and we could help you get the internet connection better. Whatever you'd want, we would love to do that. It'd be fun.
Well, I really, really appreciate that, because the Geek and Sundry people did sort of mastermind it before. One of them, who was helping me run the show, has told me that she's interested in and willing to help in the future. But no, that's being able to hitch my wagon to your star would be lovely.
Other way around.
Would be.
We'd love to do that. And we don't have the same. We don't have the same financial needs that Geek and Sundry did. What is your T-shirt? Somebody said they love your T-shirt.
Oh, it's a Fruity Odie bar from Serenity.
Holy cow, that is obscure. I've seen Serenity many times. I don't even remember that part. Was it in the bar?
It's the commercial that makes River
go off,
lose her shit.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow, that is a great T-shirt. Holy cow.
It's my favorite geek stealth T-shirt.
No kidding. Yeah, now I recognize the 3 little people. Yeah.
Yeah. And the jingle is really great. I think you can find it on YouTube. It goes, Fruity Odie bar makes a man out of a mouse. Fruity Odie bar makes you bust out of your blouse. It will blow your mind. It will blow your mind. And then
the river goes. Okay, save. That's hysterical. Oh my God, that is so obscure. I mean, I remember that moment, but good Lord. I don't remember the ad. Wow.
You'd be hard pressed to find a more passionate and frothy Joss Whedonite than me.
I got that feeling. I saw another Joss Whedon T-shirt on your blog or somewhere. Yeah.
I think honestly, a lot of people think I must be like a cartoon character where I'm always wearing the same shirt. But truthfully, I've got like 4 Fruity Odie bar T-shirts.
Oh my God. So you got to get Joss Whedon to do the movie.
Well, like I'll go to a. Oh, don't tease me. Don't.
Still there.
Yes, yes, he's brilliant at everything he does. But the real reason I want him is because nobody tells that character-centered story as well as Joss Whedon.
Yeah.
That's.
I'm really excited about the next Star Wars. It's going to be the best ever Star Wars, easily.
Is Joss Whedon involved in that?
Not. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Is he doing Star Trek? I'm confused. No, he's not. He's not involved in that. I was thinking of something else. J.J. Abrams is doing Star Wars. That's a different story entirely.
Yeah, J.J. Abrams burned me with Alias, and I haven't forgiven him yet.
Yeah. No, I have mixed feelings about him. Yeah. But Joss Whedon, I didn't see very much of that Dollhouse, whatever it was. I haven't seen that, so.
I think a lot of people wanted Dollhouse to be something that it wasn't.
Yeah.
I very much enjoyed, like, the subtle pacing of the story. You know, because I think a lot of people wanted Firefly with different characters. Right. They wanted Buffy, you know, except it's modern urban noir or something. Whereas I just kind of went into it not expecting anything and enjoyed what it was.
Right.
But
Joss is doing the Avengers movie. That's what it is.
Yeah, the Avengers movie, and he's not the showrunner for S.H.I.E.L.D., but he's been involved with it. Yeah, which, you know, he's not the showrunner for S.H.I.E.L.D., and that means if there were something going on with my stuff, he might still be available.
He might have time.
I don't know. Words cannot express the lengths to which I would go to bring my books to his attention. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah. The thought gives me a genuine tingle. I won't lie about that. But anyway, I logged on here just to make a quick comment, and now I'm chewing up your time.
And we took your advice, and we're going to do exactly that. We're going to end the interview, and then we're going to say, okay, now if you read the book, keep listening.
Cool.
Good idea.
Cool. I will talk to you later, sir. Thank you again so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.